Welcome and thank you so much for joining today. We have Wayne Dunson with National Land Realty out of West Texas with us today. And we also have his client and landowner, Mike. I've been very excited about this webinar because we've never had the landowner perspective with the agent perspective. So before we get to chatting with Wayne and Mike, I'm going to explain a little bit about what LandGate is and also go over some of the land criteria for a solar lease. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So LandGate is a competitive marketplace and data analytics company. So we have over 300 different data sets in solar, wind, carbon, and minerals. And with that data, we bring data intelligence to properties in the way of land features, solar data, carbon data, water data, and so much more. And on top of that, we actually value every parcel in the United States for how much you could get on a solar, wind, carbon, or mineral lease. And on top of that, we're a competitive marketplace. So you can come to LandGate and list your land for sale, but more uniquely, you can list your land for lease. So on my screen, you see a ton of blue pins. These are all agents and landowners raising their hand saying that they're interested in entertaining a lease offer. And what's beautiful about listing land for lease or sale on LandGate is you're getting in front of a unique buyer set. You're getting in front of institutional investors, energy developers, such as solar developers, wind developers, oil and gas operators, carbon buyers, and they look at land in a very unique way. It's very powerful to list on LandGate. We're going to go over Wayne and Mike's listing here shortly. And one thing that I want to be so clear about is listing on LandGate is free. LandGate earns 0 commissions. So again, LandGate earns 0 commissions. We have a subscription-based service. If you want the data analytics, we do have a subscription for $10 a month if you lock in annually. If you want to attribute data intelligence to properties that your client owns, that you want to purchase, that you own, etc. But when a buyer comes to LandGate and they want to contact you, they hit this contact seller button, they get Wayne's information. LandGate is not in the middle of this. We are just the marketplace. So Wayne gets contacted directly by that energy developer or investor or whomever the buyer is. And Wayne gets total autonomy with that. Wayne has not paid LandGate 1 commission whatsoever. So I'll go over some of the land criteria, or at least not that I'm aware of. So,
Yeah.
so for your land to be considered for solar, there's 2 types of solar farms. There is commercial or utility solar, where you need a minimum of 35 acres. For community solar farms, you need anything from 2 to 35 acres. So there are various sizes of solar farms. Now, ideally, the land needs to be flat. You don't want any topography or hills, any wetlands, flood zones. As flat as possible is ideal. Now, the second part is you want to be next to electrical infrastructure. For community solar farms, those smaller solar farms, these yellow lines are distribution lines. You want to be as close as possible to a distribution line in order to have a community solar farm on your property. Now, for utility solar, you want to be within 4 miles of a substation. These yellow dots are reflecting substations here. So a lot of folks will ask me what a substation looks like. This is a picture, an example of a substation here. You got the transmission lines going across, and then there's a solar farm as well. So that's what that yellow dot is representing. Then these red lines are transmission lines. You want to be as close as possible to a transmission line, at least within a mile, I would say. Now, if you're further out, let's say that this property here wants to lease out for solar, it very well can. The energy developer just has to get easements from the neighbors to tap into that transmission line. This is very doable, happens all the time, but sometimes neighbors can be a little fickle. So the closer you are to infrastructure, the stronger it's going to be that you get into a lease. Now, something else we'll touch on in this webinar is battery storage or energy storage facilities. So an energy facility is essentially holding any excess energy from a solar or wind farm, because solar and wind farms are only efficient when it's sunny or when it's windy. Well, there's nighttime, there is cloudy times, there's also sometimes where it's not windy. So the excess energy goes to a battery storage facility, so we as consumers can still get electricity during downtimes. So this is traditionally what it looks like. It looks kind of like shipping containers. There are options where battery storage facilities can be nice and landscaped. For instance, if a property owner lives next to that substation and doesn't necessarily want to look at this, it can be worked out in the lease that it's actually landscaped and looks very nice, so it's aesthetically pleasing. Now, without further ado, why we are all here today. Wayne with National Land Realty. I believe you're licensed in both Texas and New Mexico. Please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, again, my name is Wayne Dunson, and I am a land broker with National Land Realty. So my office is considered the West Texas office, so that's where I call home. Anyway, but I am licensed in Texas and New Mexico. Uh, and so, from the before I go any further, I got a text. If somebody wants to get through, do they go to the chat box or do they go to the Q&A?
Jordan?
Do we know? I
Yes.
was just
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the FAQ option. There's also a chat option as well that I will be linking related blogs to the topics that we will be discussing today for further information. And I will be answering Q&As if they are simple questions, and then we will be answering some live questions as well, more so towards the end of this webinar.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to put that out there so people knew how to try to get in there.
Thank you, Wayne.
So my background, obviously, I've been in real estate full time for 15 years. Prior to that, I was with USDA as a range specialist. But when I went into real estate, I found National Land a few years ago, and because I was wanting to get back into the outdoors end of this and of real estate side, and when I did that, they offered up this platform called LandGate and started doing trainings and said, hey, if you want to get in here and get into leasing land for renewable energy, here you go. This is a platform. It's available to everybody in the company. So get in here and get with it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, cool. I guess this is just what land realtors all do. And I didn't even know about it. So I just jumped in and started doing all these trainings and sitting in on, of course, the trainings that our own company, National Land, was holding. And then, of course, y'all at LandGate were hosting all kinds of webinars, just kind of all the time. You got videos on the website. And so I just jumped in head first, not really realizing, I guess, even for our company itself. So within National Land, that was still a relatively new platform for us to try to pursue. And so I was sort of blazing a trail that I didn't even know was a new trail. And I found out as I went forward. So anyway, once I figured out what was available to me through this LandGate platform, that's when all of this kind of took off for me. So I don't know how far you want me to go with this yet, so I'll just stop there.
No, thank you, Wayne. And something that I really admire about you is how fearless you were jumping into this. Because a lot of other agents out there will say something like, oil and gas minerals aren't my business. Solar's not my business. Wind isn't my business. These are trillion-dollar industries where if it's not your business, it should be a part of your business. And you've probably transacted a solar or wind deal and don't even know it because they're not going to tell you if they don't have to pay premiums. If you're ignorant to it, yeah, they'll just pay you what you think it's worth. Where with Wayne, he just jumped in because he had no preconceived notions. And Wayne has definitely been a top agent in this. I've been so impressed with just, again, how fearless you've been. So thank you so much, Wayne.
Thanks. And it's funny you mentioned that because I live in Midland, Odessa, which for those that don't know that are tuning in, that's called the Permian Basin out in West Texas, which is one of the biggest oil and gas producing regions in the entire world. So for me to be a solar guy in an oil and gas world it's definitely unusual.
Indeed. You have some good minerals out there. And Mike, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mike, tell us, how did you and Wayne start working together?
Well, it was out of my own ignorance, I guess, because I have this land out in west of Fort Worth, about 150 miles, and it's there's really not very much suitable groundwater, so you can't irrigate the land, you can't water your cattle, so it's pretty much dry land. Farming agriculture, it gets $5 to $10 an acre for grazing a year. Now, I tried very hard to figure out how to make some money off this land, and so I thought there's renewables all over the place. Why can't I find some energy company that would like to do that? So I didn't know what I was doing, so I wrote letters and emails and calls and sent maps and things like that to various renewable energy companies and got nowhere. A few of them did actually answer my request, but they just weren't interested. And this went on for 2 or 3 years, and then LandGate, I kind of stumbled across them, and they said, "Why don't you contact this guy named Wayne Dunson?" So I called Wayne, and it has been great. Wayne answered my call, and he said, "Well, I'll list your property for you, but I have a quarter section, which is 160 acres." And he said, "That's not big enough to interest anybody." I did tell him I'm within a mile or so of a transmission line. He said, "That's good, but you don't have enough land." Now, so I said, "How much do I need?" And he said, "You need 1,000 acres." So I went to the appraisal district website, found the names and addresses of all my adjoining landowners, and sent them maps and a letter. And within 3 weeks, we had 1,800 acres that all wanted to join. And so those are the ones that are shown there in green. And I got back to Wayne. He goes, "Man, this is doable. We can work with this." So that's where it started, and I couldn't be happier. Wayne just took it off and ran with it.
Well done, Mike. And the more acreage you have, the more negotiating power you have at the end of the day. So to me, it was absolutely ingenious that you got your neighbors together in this so that you could get so that it was more likely that you could get a done deal and also help out your neighbors at the same time. This works in oil and gas minerals, in solar, wind, carbon. The more acreage you have, the more negotiating power you have. So well done. And Wayne, when Mike came to you, what did you do to see like what the land would be best for? What resources did you use to see if it'd be good for solar, wind, ranching, whatever the case would be?
Well, so when we initially started going back and forth on where, the first thing he said was, "Here's the properties that I've got," and he had another one that I believe was southwest of this property. Is it southwest of here?
Correct.
Yeah, and so we looked at where both his parcels were, and I mapped them out, and of course, the first thing I need to look at, regardless of how many acres he had alone, it was looking at location, right? So the first thing that I'm worried about is infrastructure. And you alluded to this in the beginning. We're talking about the things that we want to see for a solar farm, or for a property that may have some likelihood of being leased. And so he had 2 different parcels. So I looked them both up, and then I went into, which is now you would go into my maps, I guess, now in the new way that it's set up. And so, and added the parcels, went in, ran a report, and pulled up all the electrical infrastructure. So I click solar, collect electrical infrastructure. So this is the first thing I'm going to do on any piece of ground that somebody reaches out to me about. Identified on the map. So I'm going to click the parcels. I'm going to turn them into my portfolio. Then I'm going to turn on the solar if that's what they're calling me about. And then I'm going to pull up electrical infrastructure. So that's what I want to see. Where's the lines? Where's the substations? Are there any other existing solar or wind around there or close by. I look at some other stuff too. So we got to look at the land because we couldn't have a rock slope, right? It needs to be hopefully some pretty level country. We need to make sure that there's accessibility to that. So how do you get there? Does it got a road? Has it got paved road frontage, county road frontage, some kind of frontage, some kind of access point? And then another one that I look for that's huge, and being in West Texas, you wouldn't think it's an issue. But floodplain absolutely is a deal. Solar developers don't want to put solar in a 100-year floodplain. And so we have to look at all of that. So then we map it and we put out, once we get the report generated, it's going to tell me, and I see that Brooke's got it pulled up here. So we're going to be looking and it shows here the acreage, and we ended up with a total buildable acreage. So now I know, initially with Mike's ground, where his property was located, what was closer to the infrastructure. So let's narrow it down to the best ground. And so we did, and it ended up being over here where the solar farm is now optioned. And I said, well, look, that other property over there is not going to work. Let's look at this one and let's key in here. And so he identified the neighbors, and the only thing left for me to do with Mike is recruit him to National Land and make him an agent with us because he was a go-getter. And so once he found out that this line was here, so you can see where it says Riley J. Pace, and we had a transmission line. So I was able to click on that and get the size of the line. Now I can't see remaining capacity, but I can see that it's a 138 kV. So I would like to have, over 600, but close to 1,000 acres if I can get that. And so, we don't get to find out until later, unfortunately, what the capacity of that line is. And in his case, it had about 100 megawatts left, and we found that out. Anyway, so he identified a whole bunch of landowners. We had more than we could work with, and unfortunately, it was kind of sad. We put together a big spread. It made us very attractive. Ultimately, because of remaining capacity in the line, we were only able to use 3 land parcels that were there. A little over 800 acres is what we're able to take in. And so here's what's important about the infrastructure end of that. The 2 farthest north guys did not get in because they were the farthest from the line. So when you talk about importance of your location, it's huge. And it's unfortunate because Mike did all the legwork. He had a great attorney, and he got the least amount of acreage because he was farthest away that did get included. So that was kind of heartbreaking, I felt like, but he's still in it. But had he been further south, we would have had more of his country in there. So but anyway, I think I've probably started going a little bit too far in here, but that's kind of the process. I identify the land. I go into LandGate, right? So I find the parcels, identify them. We'll look at the properties on the land. I'm going to look at where the infrastructure is. In his case, it was solar. So I'm looking at all the things that pertain to solar as far as the infrastructure. And then we're going to look at buildable acreage, and then we're going to go from there. So
once you listed it on LandGate and you were presented with a lease offer, what were the next steps for both you and Mike?
Okay, so for those of you, I don't know how many people are on here that are active LandGate users and how many that are thinking about doing it. When you go in here, there's a listing side to your login, and I can list it. And so I take all those parcels, I turn it into a listing, and I put a description in there. I can upload documents, whether it's just something about tax parcel IDs or whatever you want to load in there. So I turn that into a listing, and we're off to the races, right? And I tell everybody that's in the solar world, if you haven't been a part of one, it's a hurry up and wait situation. It's a slow game. So things develop at a snail's pace. But here's the thing, when you put this out there, that's immediately going out to the world quickly, right? And people are watching for that. Or there may be, if they're a certain level of a subscriber, they may be getting emails on this. And they're getting emails sent directly to their account that says, hey, here's a new listing. Take a look at this. So I'm going across the desk of people right quick within the first couple of weeks. So from an exposure level, it's huge. And then, finally, and it really didn't take all that long, I don't think. I had a developer reach out to me. He said, I found your property. I was actually, and this is weird, it's totally irrelevant, but this is just how real estate life works out. I'm pulling up in the evening to check my mail and the phone rings, and I don't recognize the number. And it's the CEO of a solar development company. And he says, I want to know about this property you've got listed in LandGate. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. And lo and behold, we're under option with them now. And so did he have some questions? He did. And we went back and forth, and he put me in contact with somebody that's more closely tied to our area, because they tend to have people that work in different vicinities of the country. So he put me in contact with someone else. I gave him a little bit more information on what I had. He asked me for some different, maybe it was some KML files out of Google Maps. I sent him what I had on maps that I've created in our own platform under National Land. I gave him tax parcels, just a bunch, anything that I could possibly give them. Because let's get real, these developers have more advanced stuff than I've got. They pay a lot of money for really top end stuff, but I'm gonna do everything I can for my client, because at the end of the day, when you're in this realm, and that's what's so cool about it, I'm working for Mike Tibbetts. So he's my client, and I'm going to do everything I can to facilitate making life easier. I don't want that developer to dig for any more info. They're going to have to go pay to find out about the carrying capacity of that line anyway, probably. And so anything I can do to represent my client in the best light is what I'm going to do. And anyway, they got back to us, and it took a long time. I'm just going to tell you right now. But they said they were interested, and I did what I would do. I called Mike and I said, Mike, we got somebody interested. Great. Now what? Now we wait. And, in this case, and I'll tell you, for those that haven't done it before, and maybe you have, but you worked with somebody that did it differently. Business models are different. The way they operate is different. We didn't sign an exclusivity agreement up front. These people said, we're going to do our research. We'll get back to you. Okay. Well, cool. But here's the thing. I work for Mike. So his property's still out there. We're still in LandGate. We're still marketing this thing. Other people can still be looking at this property while we are waiting for them to get back to us, because I don't know what their answer is going to be. Right. And 4 months down the road, that's about how long it took for them. And this company has a transmission team. So they did all the vetting up front, or as much as they could possibly do, which is going to boost our chances. And I don't want to get ahead of myself on chances of success on a solar lease, but they came back to us and they made an offer. We didn't know what was going on for 4 months, and they gave us a term sheet, is what I'm going to call it. It was almost like a memorandum of understanding. If you've seen a memo filed in county records, at least in Texas, you can pull them up at the county clerk's records, and it will show a memorandum, and it's got a term sheet. That's basically what they sent us and said, how do you feel about this? Here's all the acres we want. Here's the price we're willing to pay for acre. Here's the option period, or what due diligence. I'm sorry. So the due diligence window, here's what we'd pay in the due diligence. Now negotiations kicked off, but it was a mind-blowing offer. And it was like, whoo, I was excited. I don't know if Mike was, but when I saw the numbers, if I could do a backflip without going into the hospital, I would have done one. So I don't know. I've kind of gone on too far, so maybe I should stop and you can kind of pick up from there, Brooke.
No, you're just fine. And one thing you brought up was that the transmission line team came. And so one thing I wanted to point on so listeners understand, so when you first go into a solar lease, you don't get the solar panels built the next day. First, there's what's called the option period, where essentially a solar developer has time to do due diligence, get into the interconnection queue of the substation, get purchase power agreements, a lot of different bells and whistles they got to do over there. Part of that is traditionally how it works. A developer will lease up as much land as they can in an area. And because they want to get in what's called the interconnection queue of a substation, essentially this is a line. How much capacity is left in the substation? And essentially, you'll get rejected if you don't have land ready to go. So for them to have a transmission line team, like Wayne was saying, is extremely impressive in that usually they don't look at capacity until after they get approved into that utility a lot of times. And so I thought that was actually very important to bring up because that's one way of knowing that that buyer's serious at the end of the day. And Mike, I would like to ask you, what was most surprising through this process in the beginning when they were starting to show interest?
Well, I guess one of the most interesting and the pleasantly surprised was that the first realtor that I got that was a specialist in renewable energy, Wayne, I mean, he had nearly all the answers. He didn't have to reinvent the wheel. He got me that report in about 2 weeks with far more data than I could process. And it showed to me that this guy didn't have to invent the wheel. He already had it. He already had the resources out there to pursue this opportunity. So I was very pleasantly surprised, very pleased, and I guess really I ought to say I'm blessed to get that. And so Wayne took off from there. Now I had dealt with a solar company a year or so earlier that was real gung ho at first, and then they just quit talking to me, wouldn't answer my calls. But I had some experience then with them that I was able to ask questions of Wayne, and he was able to take care of it. And this company that we're dealing with now, I had questions of what do we do with the taxes, because it does me no good to make a bunch of money on this solar lease if I have to pay it all out in taxes because the value of the property's gone up so much. Another thing was, what do we do with if the solar power company goes out of business and my land is now worthless because I've got steel posts all over it. And so Wayne was able to address these issues, and those are some things that I had to do to answer questions for my neighbors. I had to be able to give them the answers that Wayne gave me so that they would join in. And it made the process so much smoother working with somebody that knew what they're doing. And then that LandGate was able to get him the potential solar companies.
Thanks, Mike. And so, Wayne, with that, what are the important details to consider when you first get that lease offer, that due diligence, the option period offer?
So in this case, and I guess it could be all cases, but since we've got Mike on here, the first thing I did was reach out to Mike. And the reason I reached out to Mike is he's been my point man. I've never had a co-op situation where a guy actually went out and actively recruited all his neighbors and said, here's your opportunity, right? Instead of somebody saying, I'd rather just sell my land, they said, cool, yeah, let's go for it. We're going to take Mike's word at this. So we get this term sheet and I send it to Mike first and we look at it. And now I'm going to just go ahead and tell you now the reason that Mike was also a great point man. We've got a guy in his 90s, well, a married couple, both in their 90s. Everything has to be sent in the mail. That's just all there is to it. So talking to them, it's only on the phone. We've got another gentleman that kind of sort of does email. He had his leg amputated right before this all started. He was in and out of the doctor a lot. We had a whole lot of stuff going on. So rather than try to run all these people down and send them out in the mail, I was able to call Mike. Mike was my point guy. Thank God he was. And we look at the terms, and the first thing I tell Mike is this is awesome, right? But that's my opinion, and it's not my land. So I'm just telling him what my thoughts are on it. And I said, I think this is amazing. Like, there's some terms that maybe we could wiggle on, but overall, this looks really good. And I mean, they sent the full meal deal. When they blew out the offer, we got like a 35-page contract or something like that. Or maybe it's 38. I don't remember. They sent it all and said, all you got to do is sign here and we're rocking. I mean, it was that aggressive. And luckily, I mean, I know some people, but I told Mike that, I feel like we need to have this reviewed by an attorney. Not because I didn't think the terms were good, but because I'm not an attorney, right? I can't draft contract language legally. And I need an attorney to look at that. So, an energy company, when they send these over, if they don't send it up front, you can ask for it. And you can get like a Word and a PDF, or you can get what's called a red line. And we send this over to an attorney. Since Mike had already had an experience prior to our contact, he had a guy that knew about solar contract language, because it's not the same. And I talked about this with our chief marketing officer on a podcast. You're not going to call your personal injury lawyer that asks about if you got hurt in a car wreck. You're going to talk to somebody that has an understanding of contracts that deal with energy, especially renewables, because the contract language, honestly, is very similar. And for instance, talking about decommissioning a project and how that all works out in Texas, it's mandated by Texas utility code that there's a bond in there to fund the removal of the equipment when that's over and restore the property as best as they can back to its original status, short of having to plant trees or crops or something. But anyway, nonetheless, I think I'm blabbing, but Mike had an attorney. So that was the next step after communicating this to all the parties involved, is let's have the attorney review this. And so, and Mike may want to comment on that, but that's kind of my recollection. I was at a meeting in Marfa out in the mountains, barely had cell phone service. And I think I was on the balcony with like an 8-foot phone cord trying to get service and talk to him about it. Anyway, but that was the first thought, is now we need to have an attorney review this. And luckily he had one.
Beautiful. And Mike, that attorney, he originally was an oil and gas attorney, is that correct?
Well, I don't know if that originally was, but when I found him, I had to go through several attorneys that recommended me to, but anyway, he's a specialist in oil, gas, minerals, and renewables. So he's, like Wayne said, he's not a lawsuit or divorce attorney or something like that. This guy specializes in it. And he was, if I remember Wayne's comments, when we got the comments back from the attorney, Wayne said, this guy knows what he's doing. He's fair. Wayne told me that he knew of some attorneys that tried to squeeze the last penny out of the developer, that the developers just quit. But this guy knew what he was doing, and he said, the increase per year you need to double that from 1% to 2%. He said, if they want to buy land from you to put a substation on, don't take $3,500 an acre, move it up to 10,000. And he redlined some other things, but it was all, I mean, he was very thorough, but in the end, the developer agreed to every bit of it. And so we were very blessed to have an attorney that had done this before, wasn't trying to put the screws to the developer, but was looking out for our interest. So it's got to be a win-win. You've got to have a balance. You can't put it to the developer and expect them to roll over and take it. And so we tried to be fair, and evidently we were, because they agreed to it.
Absolutely. And this is something I've mentioned to folks who end up subscribing. One of the biggest mistakes that landowners that I've seen them make is negotiating themselves out of getting a solar farm actually built. Or like Wayne said, if you fight them too hard, they're like, we don't want to work with this landowner. They're too difficult. Like, we're going to go work with the neighbor. So usually having that insight is very good of being fair in these, because you're more likely to get a solar farm built on your land at the end of the day. You know, if they're leasing your land.
Let me
I'm
bring
sorry,
it
go ahead.
That's real important. When I first sent Wayne's contract to the attorney, he said, well, this looks very fair, except he said, Wayne wants 8% of whatever your proceeds are instead of 6%. He said the standard real estate offer contract is 6%. I said, yeah, but that's for people who sell land and houses. This guy is a specialist, and I'm willing to get 92% of something than 94% of nothing. And I convinced my neighbors that we're dealing with a specialist here. It's worth paying the extra to get somebody. And I think it's already paying off. So that's something you need to realize, that if somebody says, well, I'll do it for 6%, yeah, they may do it and you get nothing. So Wayne's doing it for 8%, and I'm very happy to pay it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mike. And like you guys said, it's so important to have somebody in your corner at the end of the day who knows how to get it done. With your attorney and with Wayne, it looks like it's really going to be promising for you all. I'm very excited.
Yeah,
Cool.
and can I point out something too?
Yeah.
So I think it's actually the landowner that's just below Mike's property. He had like a 25% ownership in his minerals, and the other somebody else had like 75%, if I remember right.
Mhm.
And it was on that Middlebrook property there. Well, he had a good chunk of the acreage. I think it was 400 plus acres down there. And they wanted to use every inch of that place. Well, from a mineral perspective, we can't block out a mineral owner. It's just not possible.
Right.
And so if somebody wanted to come in there and drill a well and that place has got a solar array covering every square inch of that property, we're going to have a real issue. Now, yes, you can do, horizontal drilling, but that company may not want to spend that kind of money to run a horizontal 2 miles to get underneath them. And it costs that drilling company, way more money to do so. There's too much there at stake. And so we negotiated up front to have a drill site reserved on that property because of mineralize. And that's not a heavily drilled area, but the chance is always there. So rather than be concerned, we went back to the solar developer company and said, listen, this is the only way we're going to be able to get this done and protect all of us, is to have a little spot carved out as a drill site. Because if anybody's ever seen a drilling rig, they're huge. And you're going to need a road in and out, and there's going to be tons of vendors, and they all drive gigantic trucks. And there's going to be a bunch of big equipment and maybe sand silos if they're fracking, all this stuff. And most of those drill sites run 2 to 5 acres. So, I mean, it just depends. Nonetheless, it wasn't feasible to not address it. Luckily, Mike's attorney was able to put together language that the developer felt good with. And again, this is where I can't do that. Like, I know it needs to be there, but if I just wrote in myself, hey, you know what, we're going to put a little bit of us acreage over here in the corner, and everybody sign off on that. And then we ended up in court. Everybody's going to laugh like hell when they find out that Wayne Dunson wrote that, and I'm not an attorney. There's no protections there. But by having an attorney do that, do it in the right way, and then have the attorneys on the contract side of this developer put their finishing touches to it to make it feel good for them. Boom. Okay, now everybody's protected. And so it's good that we're all comfortable with it. And so that's where sometimes little specific quirks like that can be great, to have that attorney on board.
Absolutely. And contrary to popular belief, solar, wind, and oil and gas can actually all play nice together. I've been on or seen panels where there was a bunch of agents and there was solar developers on the panel, and the agents asked them, like, how are you going to allow us to do oil and gas and solar? And every one of them agreed that we will carve out 5-acre places so that they can drill a rig at a later date, because you have the right to enjoy your minerals, as the law states. So that is something to keep in mind. Solar and oil and gas actually can play nice together at the end of the day. No, thanks for pointing that out, gentlemen. And what would you say? I'm going to ask both of you this. So Wayne, I'll ask you first. What was your biggest challenge, would you say, through this process?
Honestly, I don't see, this might sound silly. So because the LandGate platform is so thorough, what I would call the discovery phase of this, where I look at the property and see if it might have a possibility, that end of it is quick. I can do it fast, right? There's not a lot of waiting. I can punch out a report in minutes if I need to. If I got the time and the wherewithal to get it all handled, I can do it quick and I can get results fast. A lot of it is the wait. If you want to call it the wait, that to me is the most challenging end. So we had, at one point, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that we were all tied to, on Mike's solar deal here originally when we put together the co-op. And one of the guys, his name is Johnny, and I just love him to death. He's a high energy dude. And he was calling me pretty much weekly. What do we got, Wayne? Where are we at? What's the update? What's the scoop? And I'd have to say, I don't know. I don't have any. Right. And I didn't. And I'm not going to lie to him and say, yeah, man, we've been talking. Just give it time. Cause I hadn't heard a peep out of them. I could shoot an email over and they'd just be like, it's coming. We're looking at it. And I wasn't getting any feedback at all from the developer. And so to try to relay that to a whole bunch of folks and say, hey, I'm still here. I want you to know this didn't go away, but we just, hey, I'm still marketing your property. We're still in LandGate. We can still be contacted by other developers, but right now I'm still waiting, and that could take months. And I think I may have told Mike that, I've seen these take 3 or 4 months to get anything back. But that doesn't make it feel easier, to wait. That's a long time. just to sit and wait when you know somebody's got interest and it takes
Right.
that long to get an offer. So to me, that was one of the biggest challenges for all of this, because the LandGate side is so easy to look up this stuff and see that we ought to have a chance. The other end of that is just communication between 5 people. And Mike made that simpler than any, because we got terms that were so good. I would be making it up if I said going through that contract was difficult. And don't get me wrong, if you're watching this, these contracts are crazy long. And if you've never seen one, it is overwhelming. I remember vividly my first one. And luckily, I had a teammate on National Land Realty solar development side that was working with me on the deal, and he helped me through that. And he held my hand, I mean, literally through the whole process. They look scary, but once you've seen one, they all look scary, but they all look the same. And you start recognizing patterns in the language that they all have. And it takes away the mystical stuff of a contract. Now we just got to see, can we negotiate this in a way that everybody's happy? So the biggest part of that, I think, for me, and it's probably in any real estate situation, communication was key. But the wait. Oh, it was gut wrenching for me, and probably for Mike and all his partners too.
Absolutely. Mike, what would you say was the most challenging for you?
My most challenging part was finding Wayne. Because I tried on my own for 2 or 3 years to reach out to companies because I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know there's such thing as a real estate agent that specialized in solar and wind and renewables and all that. So I was kind of doing it on my own. And when LandGate suggested I get with Wayne, it just kind of went down. I mean, it was just coasting downhill from there. Yeah, we had to wait, but life is full of waiting. So we were, it was good. Now, the second hardest part was telling the 2 neighbors to the north of me that there wasn't enough capacity left in line to include them. But they were gracious about it. But anyway, the hardest part was finding Wayne, and second hardest was telling the other neighbors that they weren't going to get to be a part of it.
That's understandable.
You know what's funny? So one of his neighbors that's in this project now and is getting a pretty good share of it all. I will say, convincing him to lease his land was it took us months. In fact, we started out advertising without his property and said, oh, well, whatever, we'll get an easement, because he had the line on him.
Okay.
And we really wanted that. And he was skeptical, and he sent my lease to an attorney, and his attorney sent it back to me with the most horrible terms. And I think I may have said something to Mike like, man, I may never see a penny out of this, right? We could go 5 years down the road, or we could go get into a due diligence window. And in this case, it's 5 years. And then them say, I'm sorry, but we can't get an interconnection agreement. I can't get a power purchase agreement. It could be a whole host of things. And then all of us are going to be sad, right? Because nobody got anything out of that, but we could say we tried. And I mean, to me, it's worth it, because it's life-changing for a lot of people on the financial end. And I bring this up because, you know, it took us about 90 days, maybe a little longer, before I had to tell this guy's attorney, I'm just not going to represent y'all. I'm sorry, you're out, and we'll just move forward without you, and we'll get an easement if we need it. And you know, you can't force that, but we could go to a neighbor or whatever. And he finally hopped on board anyway. And maybe Mike, I think, worked some magic with him to convince him finally. And I think he's thrilled that he hopped on board, right? Because he's going to be making a huge chunk of money annually if we get this thing going, and it will be a big deal. And I brought this up in another talk. In his neck of the woods, let's say they make a bale of acre. Say he's not grazing, but they're farming. And you grow 1 bale per acre of dryland cotton. And just for ease of numbers, we say that they gross $400 an acre on a bale an acre dryland cotton. That's going to be dependent on commodity pricing. But so $400 an acre. Then you got to back out your inputs. So you got labor, equipment, fertilizer, seed, pesticide, all this stuff that has to be backed out of the gross income, right? So your net is not a whole lot. Well, it's easy to look at that and say, well, gosh, you've got this cleared farmland. Nothing an energy developer would like more than a piece of property that's already clear. That reduces their cost. And now they could get 2.5 times that much deposited in their bank every year without lifting one finger. that's a pretty easy sale to me, if they're just willing to be open-minded and get out of the traditional way of looking at, ground. It's I don't know. I could go on all day about that end of it.
Absolutely.
Tag on to that, Wayne.
Okay.
Some of folks there, and myself included, have emotional ties to the land. It's been in the family. It's been you've got good memories there, and there's folks that say, "Oh, my father wouldn't go for this. We farmed this land for it's been family 100 years. We couldn't go for that." Well, if you think about it, there's a way to kind of go around that. There's a topic here that we're going to get into in a minute, agrivoltaics, and in which there's a combination of making some money off the land without having to lift a finger, but then you can lift a finger doing your traditional things, whether it's putting sheep on it to graze the grass down so that the developer doesn't have to do it, or you make some sort of a cash crop off of it. And there's some benefits to not all of that heat hitting the soil. And out there in that part of the state, you only get about 25 inches of rain a year. So with this, there's some benefits to maybe mixing some sort of agriculture with the solar. And so Brooke alluded to that earlier, that they can play nice together. And so you may be able to sell this to some of the folks by saying, hey, you can still farm and use your land. You're just going to make more money off the same land. Wouldn't your dad like that? So there's some opportunities there.
And you know what? Really quickly, sorry to interrupt you, Brooke, but Mike, I just kind of want to ask you, we had Nicholas ask, what got your interest in going into solar, just because you're talking about it now and the benefits of, keeping the land, but also making more money off of the land. What kind of piqued your interest with leasing for solar? Was it passive income? Was it financial security? Was it a passion for renewable energy?
Personal greed. I just wanted I want to make some money off of that land. I think I'm getting $5 an acre for grazing that land, and it pays the taxes, but that's about it. And I love it when I can find something that has potential and you develop it. And I hate it when I see, whether it's a person that has talent that doesn't use it, or somebody that doesn't invest wisely. I don't like seeing potential that's wasted. And I think this land's got some potential. So what can be done with it? And that's what LandGate and Landowner are helping me to be able to do, is to make the best use of what's there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that. I think another kind of question that kind of pairs into this as well is, let's see. So Lisa asked if your land is developed, or are you guys still going through the due diligence process with the solar developers? What stage are you all in for this solar lease?
We have signed the contract. All the neighbors and me, we've signed the contract, and so they have paid the first year's, the due diligence fee. What's that called, Wayne?
Yeah, that's right, due diligence.
Okay, so they've paid that, and I think, in fact, today they are out on the land. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow they'll be out there walking it, taking soil samples, just seeing if there's anything that they see that causes them to need to investigate more. We filled out some paperwork for them, and we've told them what we think is on the land, what we know about the history of the land. But we're in the stage now where they're looking at it to see if they want to invest the money it takes to build a farm. Right now, they're investing a small amount in the due diligence fee and in the investigation. But it's better to spend a little bit now than to waste it later. So we're in that stage now. I think it goes 5 years. Each year the due diligence fee increases, and at the end of 5 years they've got to make a decision.
Awesome. And Wayne, if you wanted to elaborate on that, is that something that you negotiated within the lease terms, that increase of due diligence fees with the solar developers?
Yeah, and so really and truly, when you look at terms on any contract, they're going to be negotiable to a certain degree. When an energy developer, it's been my experience, when they send you over an offer, they know how much wiggle room they've got when they send it. And it may be a little, it may be a lot, and it may be dependent upon what it is you're trying to mess with them on, right? So for acreage right now, we've got a set amount. We actually upped Mike's acreage. He said, y'all told me you would do a minimum. And when we got the paperwork in, it was different. So then we had to change it. Then they sent it again and it was different. And we went back and forth a bunch on his to get a set minimum acreage that they had to take. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, if they come in and they survey out the official acreage, that's the real pay deal. So once they've surveyed it, regardless of what's in our initial lease, the acres will be solidified by a survey. And that's where the big payments will be paid, is on those acres, whenever that may happen. As far as the due diligence, they came at us with a 5-year window, and they didn't seem to make any indicator that they wanted to do anything less than 5. I've seen them broken down into a whole lot of different terms: 3 years with the option to extend for 2, 4 years, 2 years, no payment, and then a 3-year. I've seen so many different ways to organize that. But in my opinion, here's the thing, and I talk about this a lot with solar. They're spending money from the day they sign that contract with you. And why nitpick just a whole lot on the option when the big money comes when they break ground? Now, granted, if they don't break ground, you want to try to maximize that. So, I mean, I'm not making light of the fact that every penny counts, because your land's tied up for however many years and you're going to get what you're going to get out of that. But to the degree that you're arguing over pennies when it could be dollars is kind of my thought. But you can negotiate that. And we did negotiate Mike's acreage and his due diligence fee a little bit different. Now, I've seen them structured in different ways, and I don't know that there's any right way. It depends on if the client is cool with it. But I've seen flat fee for all years. So maybe, and this is going to vary. I want to point out, whoever's listening in different parts of the US, you may make 3 bales an acre of cotton on your ground in Iowa or wherever. So all these things are going to be subject to change depending on your location. But I've seen flat fees on an option for all the years. So maybe it was $25 an acre for all the acreage for all 5 years every year. I've seen them start out at $15 an acre and go up to like $75 an acre. I've seen a whole bunch of stuff. All of that can be negotiated. I think it just depends on your client, what they feel is important. And then we can try to work on that with the developer and see, where they're willing to budge on that. So that could all be negotiated for sure to a certain level.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And I think another question that a lot of landowners do wonder is, how many acres is enough acres? And I think your case is, very unique, as in, Mike was able to rally his neighbors in order to pull in more acreage to get that better deal solar farm. So Wayne, in your experience, your solar leases that you've handled, what is kind of typically the sweet spot or the range that you've seen for acreage?
Well, so I had a developer, for lack of a better term, dumb this down to me. General rule of thumb: we're going to be looking at making 1 megawatt of power per 6 acres. So if we're looking at a utility scale 100 megawatt project, I want 600 acres. Well, in Texas, if we're a 640 acre square section, well, we're going to probably want the whole thing by the time you look at possibly needing a substation and battery storage and what have you. So that's what I go by now, is 6 acres per megawatt. So I'm looking at 600 plus acres for a 100 megawatt utility scale farm. Now you got to look at this from the standpoint of that line. So that line was big enough to handle, from an economic feasibility standpoint to the developer, about that 100 megawatt size, right? So they needed somewhere between 600 and 1,000 acres. Now, if that was a 345 kV line, it's my understanding that the interconnection point, so that tie-in, is going to be more expensive. The infrastructure needed to build a tie into that is more expensive. the acres is going to go up to probably 1,000 or more, like minimum, because you got to amortize out all those costs over the life of that contract to the developer too, right? So this is a two-way street, where we try to look at it from all sides. But when I'm dealing with a landowner, that's what I'm looking at. If I'm looking at utility scale, I'd like to see, now don't get me wrong, I have one that's 325 acres. It's a company that seems to specialize in smaller stuff, and I've never got to the root yet of exactly what they're up to, but I think it may be distribution locally, instead of, feeding into some larger grid. So there are exceptions, and, let's not even talk about battery storage. Maybe you're talking 5 or 10 acres, right? If you're right on top of a substation. But I mean, just for looking at what I'm usually dealing with, I say 6 acres per megawatt's a pretty easy way to break it down.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And for Brooke, we're getting a lot of questions of what's the typical price per acre for a solar lease? And can I list my land for multiple resources at a time? So if you wanted to expand on that, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. And something I also wanted to expand on size. Wayne was mentioning earlier that it also, your location matters. Texas versus Maryland, for instance. Maryland is a state that doesn't have a lot of acreage. I was talking to a subscriber who happened to have 30 acres in Maryland. And I told him, I was like, it's unlikely. I would list it if I owned it, but just to manage expectations, I doubt you're going to get an offer tomorrow. 3 days later, he calls me and goes, you were wrong. I was like, I'm glad I was. So I'm going off of that. Maryland is a state that also has higher tax incentives. So what's very interesting about solar and wind is it's not necessarily the wind speeds or the sunlight that dictates where a solar or wind farm is built. For instance, in Maryland, I believe developers are paid more than $300 per megawatt hour produced on top of what they're charging consumers for electricity. Therefore, your lease rate in Maryland is going to be higher than a state like Texas, where in Texas, their tax incentive is $1.32 per megawatt hour produced. And how I know this is LandGate. So if we go to electrical infrastructure, on a listing or on a property, and you go down to commodity pricing, state and local incentive, the state of Texas is $1.32 per megawatt hour produced, and what developers are paid on top of what they charge consumers for electricity. So every state is different. This is done at the county level. So in Colorado, for instance, there's one county where it's, I believe it's $32, and then the rest of the state seems to follow $5. This could change. Minnesota is a very funny state to me. Saturated with solar farms. Absolutely saturated. Zero sunlight in Minnesota. But their tax incentive was $110 per megawatt hour produced on top of what they're charging consumers for electricity. Because how else are you going to motivate developers to build solar and wind farms in a state like Minnesota? You have to incentivize them. So there are states that have zero incentive. North Dakota and South Dakota, for instance, no incentive. However, Wayne mentioned earlier, different developers have different goals. So one thing I've heard from developers on states with high incentives, they jump on land and they're trying to get into that interconnection queue because there's going to be a long wait because it's going to take a while to get into that queue because every developer and their mother is trying to get the incentives in that state. So that also, it's very important to jump on deals when you get them. When you start getting offers, understand that there's only so much capacity, there's only so many electrons in current infrastructure, and it takes years to build new infrastructure. In order for our current administration to reach the renewable goals, there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built, but it does take time at the end of the day. So North Dakota and South Dakota, going back to that, some developers are like, I'm actually going to go lease land over there because I'm not fighting every other developer and their mother. I have a better shot of getting into that interconnection queue than I do in a state like Minnesota, so to speak. So with how much you're paid on land, that's also dependent to what state, like how much land, like Maryland, not a lot of land, so a lot higher lease offers in a place like Maryland. Community solar actually seems to have higher lease offers than utility solar because you're using such little acreage. So with values I've seen on a solar lease, depending on the state and where you are, I've seen as low as $200 per acre per year, and the highest I've seen so far, I believe, was $3,400 per acre per year.
Wow.
That was a community solar, I believe. So I see numbers across the table in a state like Texas, for instance. I would say 500 to 1,000 is probably average. So it really does depend. And how I know all this is the data, essentially, at the end of the day, of seeing those incentives, seeing where offers are going in, for instance. So that was a long-winded answer to that question, but thank you, Jordan.
No worries. I think that long-winded question answer provides a lot of information to these folks that are curious. I think let's wrap this up for one more question, and this will be for Mike. Stephen asked, just curious, going through the process of making a decision to do this or not as well, would Mike have any insights to help with this to go with solar?
I think it depends on what your goals are for that land. I talked earlier about family heritage, what has been done with this land. And there's some folks that just, they would think that morally it's just wrong to get money off this land when great grandfather wanted to raise dry land cotton. Others, I guess you'd have, when the kids inherit it, they don't care anything about raising dry land cotton. They're an accountant in New York or whatever. And so they're perfectly willing. So you need to look, in my opinion, look at what your goals are for the land and what long-term benefits you would get from it. And then consider the possibility of combining the agrivoltaics with the solar. Maybe you can have the best of both worlds. But I think it depends on what your ultimate goals are for the land. And in my case, I think it's going to help me and my kids, my wife, help us financially in years to come. And I'm hoping it will be something I can hand down to other generations, because 20 years or 40 years, I'm not going to care. I'm not going to be around them. But if it helps my kids and my grandkids, then that's something that's pretty neat. Something I can hand down. And like Wayne said, you're not lifting the finger. That's mailbox money. That's pretty good stuff.
So thanks so much, Mike, for sharing that. So Brooke, if you want, you can wrap up today's webinar. And I just want to let everyone know that we will share these slides as well as the recording of this webinar via email on Friday.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jordan. And Wayne, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. I am sure everyone has learned so much today. It just makes such a huge difference having a landowner and a colleague come and explain how the process works. It's so valuable, and thank you so much. And if anyone is looking for a great broker, Wayne's contact information is here. By all means, reach out, and we will see you all in the next webinar.
And if you have any questions that went unanswered, we will answer them via email. Sorry, wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you, Jordan. Of course.
And can I plug on you real quick, Brooke? I just want to, for anybody that's on here that's maybe, I don't know if you new to LandGate or whatever your experience is, but I want to say that Brooke has always been there for me. Well, really anybody on the LandGate team, I've never been left hanging. If I had a question, and early on I had a whole bunch, but I don't think it's ever stopped. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I'm just being lazy, and I'll set up an appointment with Brooke and be like, can you show me how to do this? And she'll be like, sure. And she whips in and it's done. And I'm going, golly, why did I not remember how to do that? And the only reason I know Mike now is because of LandGate, right? They directly put him in touch with me. So if you're concerned on the real estate side about not getting the leads that are generated, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, in this case, they sent Mike directly to me and said, hey, y'all need to work together on this. And so I think from a perspective of getting your clients maximum exposure, but also having somebody there that will help you to understand a lot of stuff because I didn't know anything. I started from scratch and just learned it all on my own, but I did a lot of it through LandGate with their help and their training. So anyway, I wanted to plug that, Brooke, because you guys are awesome, and I wouldn't be where I was today if it wasn't for LandGate's platform.
Thank you so much, Wayne. I greatly appreciate it. Oh, thank you, gentlemen. And Mike, thank you so much for joining and giving us for the first time the landowner perspective as well.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We'll see you soon.